The slam of the Mercedes door still rang in my ears when Gideon reached for my hand. Damon's words, "You're a burden. Mother, I can't do this anymore," hung heavier than the coastal fog that drifted inland. Before I could respond, the car roared away, black paint glinting under the midday sun, tires spitting gravel across Highway 1's shoulder. I stood frozen, staring at the curve of the road where my son had disappeared. Gideon's grip trembled, not from fear, but from the weakness his heart carried these days. I turned to steady him, and that's when I noticed it, a flap of yellow against the asphalt. A manila envelope had slipped from the trunk, caught briefly by the wind before landing at my feet. I bent slowly, my knees aching, and scooped it up. Inside were neatly clipped mortgage papers, notarized trust addendums, and my pulse quickened, familiar but slightly altered initials that weren't my own. Damon's handwriting had always betrayed a heavy hand. These looked like an imitation of mine, practiced but imperfect. I pressed the envelope to my chest before Gideon could see. He had enough weight on his shoulders without this discovery. The sun bore down as we began walking. The Pacific glittering on our left, cliffs rising sharp on our right. Each step was heavy, Gideon leaning against me for balance. I tucked the envelope inside my cardigan, feeling its corners dig against my ribs. Proof of betrayal. Yes, but also a strange kind of anchor. We trudged on, the asphalt radiating heat through the soles of our shoes. The nearest gas station was still miles away. But we had no choice. Gideon coughed softly, muttering about the irony of being abandoned on the very road where he used to take Damon fishing as a boy. I bit back tears and kept moving. The ocean breeze carried salt, mixing with the sting of sweat in my eyes. By the time the silhouette of a weathered cafe and gas station sign appeared in the distance, Gideon's steps had slowed to a shuffle. I squeezed his hand tighter, whispering that we were almost there, and as we walked toward that modest refuge on the edge of nowhere, I felt the envelope shift inside my sweater, a silent reminder that Damon had left us with more than cruelty. He had left us with evidence. The bell above the cafe door gave a tired jingle as we stepped inside, the cool air heavy with the scent of burnt coffee and fried onions. Gideon lowered himself into the nearest booth, his breath ragged, his hand pressed against his chest. I slid beside him, my own legs trembling from the long walk, and glanced around at the chipped counters and faded posters that promised milkshakes no one had ordered in years. A woman with silver hair pulled into a braid sat 2 booths away, watching us with eyes that carried both curiosity and concern. When the server set 2 glasses of lukewarm tap water in front of us, she stood, rummaged in her bag, and approached. "You look like you've come a long way," she said softly. "Let me buy you bottled water, something cold." She introduced herself as Joy Carver, a local, her smile warm in a way I hadn't felt in days. Gideon accepted the drink gratefully, gulping it down before making a wry face. "Almost worth being abandoned for, Marcella. This might be the coldest water I've ever tasted." His attempt at humor drew a laugh from Joy, easing the weight in my chest, if only for a moment. While they talked, I excused myself, slipping into the restroom with the envelope pressed against my side. I pulled out my phone, snapped quick photos of the papers, and sent them to Mara Chen, not Damon. "Call me when safe." My lawyer would know what to do. She always had. When I returned, Gideon had propped his arm on the table, teasing Joy about how she ought to open her own cafe since she already knew better than the staff. I smiled, though my eyes caught on the television above the counter. A newscaster spoke about elder abandonment cases rising across California, images flashing of faces not unlike ours. I reached for Gideon's hand beneath the table, the envelope still hidden in my cardigan. Damon's cruelty had burned deep, but it would not be the final line of our story. I would see to that. No matter the miles or the secrets we carried, the clatter of dishes in the cafe pulled me back, but my thoughts drifted to the moment when everything changed. It was 5 years ago, on a night when Gideon's heart gave out beneath the dim lights of our Santa Barbara kitchen. He survived, thank God, but the doctor's warning was clear. Stress could steal him from me at any time. That was when I stepped into the role of trustee, shouldering the Hearthstone Trust he had once managed with quiet diligence. The trust was no small thing. 12 rental properties scattered across Santa Barbara. Their leases steady and reliable, along with $4.2 million in liquid reserves. Every mortgage, every repair, every tenant passed through my hands. It was work I knew well. Decades of bookkeeping had trained me to respect the power of ledgers and signatures. Gideon would rest, and I would guard the fortune we had built. What Damon never realized was how tightly his own life was tied to those papers. His auto shop, his pride, his proof of independence stood on land financed by Hearthstone funds. Even the house he and Sloan decorated with granite counters and glass chandeliers was secured under that same umbrella. And within the clauses of escrow rested a condition. Damon had never bothered to read any substantiated act of elder abuse gave me the right to repossess both home and business. The envelope in my cardigan was not the first time I had seen his desperation in ink. Years earlier, I found forged initials on a request for additional funds. He had practiced my hand, clumsy but close, thinking I wouldn't notice. I said nothing then, only photocopied the page and filed it away, building a quiet archive of proof. That night, as Gideon recovered in his hospital bed, I whispered the words that had become my compass. Patience is power, and so I waited. Ledger by ledger, page by page, knowing that if the time ever came, the very house Damon walked through and the walls of his shop could be claimed with a single stroke of my pen. Now, with the envelope pressing against my side, I felt that time drawing near. When we returned to the condo, the air was thick with tension, as though the walls themselves remembered the way Damon had dragged us to the car that morning. Sloan was already there, perched on the sofa with her legs crossed, scrolling her phone as if nothing in the world had shifted. She glanced up at me, her mouth curling into a smirk. "Marcella," she drawled, her eyes flicking to the scuffed soles of my shoes, "still clinging to your old habits." "I see. But you know, luxury cars don't run on pension pennies. Damon and I have standards to maintain." I felt Gideon stiffen beside me, his breath uneven. I ignored the barb, but my gaze lingered on her wrists and ears. Diamonds caught the light. Delicate, but far too new, far too costly to come from Damon's modest shop income. The gleam told me what her words tried to hide. Her hunger was greater than his pride. Later that evening, as I sorted through the mail at the kitchen counter, an envelope slipped free of the stack. It was addressed to Sloan, stamped in bold from a creditor I recognized. Against my better judgment, I opened it. My heart thudded as I scanned the figures, 6 figures of debt, balances overdue, threats of legal action. The truth clicked into place. Damon had not simply grown weary of us. He had been fed poison in whispers about image, about shame, about how his parents weighed him down. And Sloan, with her debts and glittering hunger, had been the hand behind it all. Gideon appeared quietly at my side, reading the fury on my face. He lowered his voice, hoarse but steady. "She's the puppeteer," he said. I folded the letter carefully, slipping it into my cardigan beside Damon's forged papers. Proof upon proof, and with each page, the blade of betrayal grew sharper, aimed not only by my son's hand, but by the one he chose to hold. 3 days passed in uneasy silence. Gideon and I kept to ourselves, watering the balcony plants, watching the tide roll in from the window, speaking little but thinking much. On the 4th evening, a knock rattled our door. I opened it to find Damon standing there, shirt wrinkled, tie loose. The sharpness of his usual pride dulled into something frayed. His eyes darted around the hallway before he stepped in. He smelled faintly of sweat and stale coffee. I noticed the redness in his cheeks not from drink, but from humiliation. "Mom, Dad." His voice cracked, almost unrecognizable. "I was desperate," Sloane said. He stopped himself, jaw clenching as though her name alone might betray him. I gestured to the table and set a glass of water in front of him. He sipped, but my hand did not linger near his. Gideon lowered himself into the armchair across from him. Cain balanced against his knee, shoulders trembling from both weakness and anger. Damon tried again. "There are rumors. Vendors cut my credit lines. People are saying I abandoned you, that there's an elder abuse report." His eyes flicked between us, searching for sympathy. I reached into my cardigan and drew out the envelope. Laying it flat on the table, I slid it toward him. His hand hovered above it, then stopped. He didn't need to open it to know what it contained. Color drained from his face. Gideon's voice, frail but unwavering, cut through the silence. "Your burden was never us, Damon. It was your lies." Damon swallowed hard, his facade crumbling. "Please, one more chance. I'll make it right." I folded my hands in my lap, saying nothing. Silence can weigh more than words, and I let it press upon him. He dropped his gaze to the floor, shoulders sagging. The room held its breath as we waited not for his excuses, but for what would come next. Damon sat hunched at our table, staring at the envelope as though it might burst into flame. I let the silence linger until he shifted uneasily. Then I drew in a steady breath. "If you want even a thread of trust left between us," I said, "there will be terms. Non-negotiable." His head snapped up, eyes narrowing. "Terms? You will begin therapy." I continued, "Not once, not half-heartedly, but regularly, with proof of attendance. You will also sign a written statement of accountability, your acknowledgement of what you did to us. And finally, you will stand before the congregation at St. Bridget's in Santa Barbara and apologize publicly, not to save face, but to lay bare the truth you tried to bury." Damon opened his mouth to protest, but I raised my hand. "There is more. As of today, I have reassigned our medical proxy. Joy Carver now holds that responsibility. You no longer have any say in our care." His nostrils flared, the flash of anger quick and hot, before he smoothed it over with a thin smile. "Of course. Mom, whatever you think is best. I only want to make things right." His voice dripped with practiced humility, but his knuckles whitened where they gripped the glass of water. Gideon, who had remained silent, leaned closer to me as Damon excused himself to the restroom. In a whisper roughened by age and sorrow, he said, "I saw the boy he was in his eyes, and the man he chose to be." I pressed his hand, my heart aching with the weight of both truths. The boy had once carried fishing rods taller than himself along this very coast. The man had left us to die on the same highway. When Damon returned, he nodded stiffly, promising he would consider what I had laid before him. I said nothing, only watched as he left the condo, his shoulders rigid. The terms were spoken, set like salt lines on a wound, stinging but necessary. And as the door clicked shut, I knew the next move would not come from us, but from him. Within a week, Mara Chen filed the papers that changed everything. With her steady voice and sharper pen, she executed the substitution of trustee. Damon's loans were frozen overnight, his credit lifeline cut short. The escrow clause, long dormant, triggered with quiet authority. His house and shop no longer belonged to him in spirit, but to the trust I guarded. I didn't revel in it. I simply redirected what had been misused. From the trust's reserves, I carved out a new purpose, the Harbor and Hearth Foundation, offering small grants to seniors abandoned like us. For the first time since that cruel day on Highway 1, I felt the weight on my chest ease, but Sloane, ever hungry for spectacle, erupted. At a neighborhood brunch, she sneered across a crowded patio, her voice rising above clinking glasses. Marcella is nothing but a senile manipulator. She's stealing from her own family. Phones turned. Cameras caught every word. And within hours, the clip spread across town, neighbors whispering, strangers judging. Yet what she hadn't expected was the sympathy it sparked. Comments poured in. Not against me, but against her. People saw the venom in her tone. The greed laced through her words. For Gideon and me, the shift was subtle, but unmistakable. A nod at the grocery store. A warm hand on my shoulder at church. A simple, "We're with you," from those who once looked away. Quiet fire had spread. Not from my lips, but from the truth she tried to bury. And as Gideon watered his roses on the balcony that evening, the world beyond our window was already turning its gaze toward the reckoning that waited in the courthouse. The courthouse in Santa Barbara smelled faintly of varnish and dust, the kind of air that seemed to hold secrets. Gideon and I sat at the petitioner's table, Mara Chen poised beside us, her briefcase, a fortress of evidence. Across the aisle, Damon looked smaller than I remembered, though his lawyer projected arrogance to fill the gap. Sloane sat behind him, her lipstick too bright, her smile too thin. The lawyer began with a polished attack. "Your Honor, my client's mother is not of sound mind. At 70, she has shown erratic behavior, paranoia, and a tendency to fabricate documents. We argue she is unfit to manage the Hearthstone Trust." His words hung heavy, crafted to bruise. Mara stood without flinching. "Then let's test that claim." She handed the judge a folder. Inside were emails, lines of text, dripping with calculation. Not Damon's words, but Sloane's. She had drafted instructions on forging my initials, urged Damon to pressure me for cash advances, even boasted about how easy it would be to push us into a nursing facility once the money ran dry. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Sloane's smile cracked, her composure slipping like paint in the sun. When it was my turn, I rose slowly, pulled a small drive from my purse, and handed it to the clerk. The screen flickered to life with the body cam and dash cam footage, Damon's voice calling us a burden. The sight of the Mercedes disappearing down Highway 1 while Gideon leaned against me for strength. No narration was needed. Silence said enough. The judge leaned forward, his gavel poised but not yet falling. "Mr. Duvall. Mrs. Duvall has proven both competence and foresight. You, however, stand accused of elder abuse." He ordered restitution, community service at the senior center, and a restraining order forbidding Damon or Sloane from interfering again. His final warning cut sharp: repeat this, and face felony charges. Gideon's hand found mine, trembling but steady. "Justice tastes like iron cold, but strong," he whispered, and as the gavel struck, I felt the echo ripple far beyond the courtroom walls, carrying us into the reckoning still to come. A week after the hearing, Damon knocked on our door again. This time, there was no arrogance in his posture, no polished rehearsals in his voice. He placed a small ring of spare house keys on the table, beside the title papers to the SUV he once flaunted like a trophy. His eyes stayed lowered, his words clipped. "These were yours all along." Mara confirmed later that he had enrolled in therapy, a requirement he hadn't fought. Word also reached me that he had started volunteering at Harbor and Hearth, the very foundation born from the trust he tried to exploit. It wasn't redemption, not yet, but it was motion in the right direction. Sloane did not follow him down that road. Within days, she packed her things and fled to Los Angeles, her debts chasing her like shadows she could never outpace. The silence she left behind was almost louder than her presence had ever been. I met Damon one morning at a cafe near the Mission in Santa Barbara. I chose the table near the window, where the sea breeze could cut through the heaviness between us. He spoke of group sessions, of sweeping floors at the senior center, of listening instead of commanding. I nodded, offering him coffee but not comfort. When he asked if I would come to his apartment, I shook my head gently. Coffee in public. Damon, that's enough for now. Boundaries stood firm. A fence where once there had only been open doors. Back home, Gideon filled balcony planters with fresh soil. His hands, though stiff, pressed seedlings into place with quiet determination. As he watered the earth, he smiled at me, lines deepening around his eyes. "We grow again, Marcella," he said softly, the roses taking root as proof, and as their first green shoots reached for the sun, I realized the season of reckoning was giving way to something new. A year has passed since the courthouse, and the rhythm of my days feels lighter, steadier. Gideon and I moved north to Monterey, trading the tension of old streets for the calm of the marina. Our condo overlooks rows of white-sailed boats that rock gently against the docks. Morning light pours through wide windows, gilding the roses that line our balcony in clay planters. They thrive here, stubborn in the salt air, much like us. The Harbor and Hearth Foundation has grown beyond anything I imagined. On weekends, our guest rooms welcome 10 seniors at a time, men and women once forgotten, now greeted with warm meals and shared laughter. Volunteers from the town drop in, bringing baked goods or guitars, filling the halls with sound. Local papers wrote about us not long ago. Retired couple transforms betrayal into haven. I clipped the headline and folded it into the pages of my ledger, not as a boast, but as a reminder of what pain can build when redirected toward purpose. Damon is different now. The arrogance is gone, replaced by a quiet diligence. He doesn't speak much when he visits, but actions often outlive words. He assembles planters for the balcony, carrying bags of soil, drilling holes for drainage, arranging them neatly so Gideon can tend them without strain. Sometimes I catch him pausing, staring out at the water as if measuring the distance between who he was and who he is trying to become. I do not interrupt. Some journeys need silence. Gideon's health is fragile, but his spirit glows each time he kneels by the roses. He hums while he works, a tune I half recognize from our early years. And when he looks up, there's peace in his eyes. I bend to trim a rose, the petals opening crimson against the ocean breeze. My voice barely rises above the wind as I whisper words I have come to believe with all my being. Love may open doors, but only respect keeps them open. The tide moves beyond the balcony, steady and eternal, carrying us forward with it into days we no longer fear.